Grieving families wait outside a morgue in the town of Churachandpur in India's northeastern state of Manipur. Their relatives were killed in violence between Kuki tribal groups and the ethnic majority Meitei people. The Kukis say they won't bury their dead until the government agrees to their demand for a separate state. Among them is Chin Naihat, whose sister was killed last week.
It's not just about my sister. This now concerns all tribals. These people gave their life to save our land. We can't just let it go to waste.
For years, tensions have been simmering between Kuki and Meitei communities, mainly over the distribution of resources such as land. But the government's recent decision to give tribal status to the Meiteis proved to be a tipping point. Dozens of people have been killed and more than 30,000 displaced in the last month. Some Kukis fled to this relief camp from the city of Imphal, which is the capital of Manipur and is dominated by Meiteis.
I don't think I would be able to go back to Imphal again because all my important documents and some important files were burnt down and our house were destroyed.
Outside the capital, armed guards protect a Kuki village. They're volunteers who are on the lookout for Meitei attackers.
They will start burning our villages again. If we don't man the duty post, they will not only burn our villages, but all villages in the hills.
But Meiteis blame Kukis for the recent violence. These women are protesting against the Kukis' demand for a separate state and accuse them of sheltering undocumented migrants from neighbouring Myanmar.
Manipur is a 2,000-year-old civilization. We can't give in to their demand for a separate administration. They can demand it in Myanmar, but not here in Manipur.
Meitei groups want the Indian government to take action against Kuki separatist groups, but days after the Interior Minister visited the state, tensions remain high. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
All of us are united in the fact that we feel as much grief for what is happening in Manipur as Manipuris themselves. But the fact of the matter is there have been channels that have covered this conflict 72 days straight, every single day. The fact of the matter is it's made it to our newspapers that, young people like yourselves, other podcasters have been covering this, and that is because of the definite change that has happened in our mainstream consciousness, in their mainstream consciousness, because of the kind of outreach that has been made to the Northeast. Manipur actually is, in my opinion, I've studied all the states, I've lived in that region, I've traveled to all the remote areas, and I've studied insurgencies. So Manipur is possibly more complex than any of the other states because not only does it have the Meitei community, it has the Kukis and it has the Nagas. So when we say tribals, that this is a fight between Meiteis and the tribals, it's not quite right because tribals are Nagas and Kukis, wherein the fight is only between the Kukis and the Meiteis. The Nagas have not stepped into this fight,
Ad verbatim, separation is the only answer. Leaders of the mainly Christian hill tribes are saying that living alongside the Hindu Meitei people is as good as death for our people. So can we say amongst all this plethora of complexities, permutation, combination, there is an underlying thing of where, and you would know this of course as an authority, that this is a Christian majority Kukis versus Hindu majority Meiteis? You spoke about China, right? And during our research, we found out that China was at the forefront and still is behind funding of all the terror insurgents groups in Northeast. To which credit to the current dispensation that, they got into these historic peace accords. And in fact, just last year in 2021, there was this brutal attack on an army convoy in which a colonel, his wife, and a 5-year-old son were killed. And that is when Hindustan Times reported that this seems that China is back to its games and this terror attack was funded by them, coordinated by them. A lot of those terror insurgents from Northeast are also in China. How much would you put China's hand behind what has transpired in these last 2 months?
Let me give you some statistics, If you ask me why they have joined this national narrative, and it's not just in Manipur, but even if you look at Tripura, you look at Nagaland, because this region was ignored for decades on end. And we can't keep, I blame the British for a lot of their policies, but we had the opportunity for 70 years to reverse these policies and we never did. We absolutely ignored this region. Today, there has been a 74% reduction in insurgency incidents. There has been an 89% decline in civilian deaths in 2021 compared to 2014. There has been over 6,070 cadres of various insurgent groups in the northeastern states who have surrendered with over 1,404 arms and have joined the mainstream.
नमस्ते, स्वागत है आपका इंडिया दिस वीक के नए एपिसोड में और मैं हूं आपकी होस्ट आमना खालिद बेग के साथ.
Hi, this is Khalid Beg. Welcome to yet another episode of India This Week by Amana and Khalid. Today we are joined by Rami Desai, who's a known anthropologist, author, and a scholar of Northeast. Welcome, Rami.
Thank you, Amna. Thank you, Khalid, for having me on your show.
Rami, of course, as the viewers can see, the topic today is about what's happened in Manipur. So we just want to, for the uninitiated, even though, people who follow current affairs passionately do know about it, even though, the argument could be that the coverage is very subdued or, not enough is getting covered. So Manipur has been burning for 2 months now due to ethnic clashes between the Meitei community, which is the majority community, and the tribal Kukis. The tension escalated after a tribal solidarity march was held in the state's hill districts on May 3rd to protest against Meitei's demand for scheduled tribe status. So what we understand, it's ethnic clashes between these two groups. One is the Meitei community and one is the tribal Kuki community. So Rami, want to understand from you if you could break down to us, because most of us, of course, except for scholars like you in Northeast, don't know what does the Meitei community comprise of, what is the tribal Kukis, what is the population, what is the historical sort of tension between them, and currently these severe clashes which have led over 100 people dead. So over to you, Rami.
Thanks, Khalid. Yes, you're right. This region is very complex. It hasn't been in mainstream consciousness for a very long time. It's only recently that we've started refocusing on the Northeast region. And therefore, there has been lack of information, lack of media coverage, and sort of lack of there's been a divide and I call it a psychological divide, because it's not just about it being geographically distant, but psychologically for a very long time, anybody who lived in any other part of India used to look at the Northeast as being very diverse and very distant and very complex for anybody's comprehension. But let me say this, and if you disagree with you a little bit, in terms of, we might have this perception that there hasn't been much coverage, or we aren't focusing on the Northeast. But as somebody who has been researching this area, has been on the field, has lived in this area for over 15 years, I can tell you, I consider myself to have a little bit of a vantage point, because I've seen times then and I've seen times now. And specifically, I say this is post 2014, wherein the dispensation that came in 2014 made the Northeast a central focus in their foreign policy via the Act East policy. So I remember 15 years ago when there used to be a bomb blast, and I vividly remember one of them was in, I think maybe 2008, 2009, in the ISKCON temple, where children were killed as well, and many, many people injured. The first time it appeared in the news in Delhi was on the third page, many days later, wherein with this conflict, and as sad as it is, and I think all of us are united in the fact that we feel as much grief for what is happening in Manipur as Manipuris themselves. But the fact of the matter is there have been channels that have covered this conflict 72 days straight, every single day. The fact of the matter is it's made it to our newspapers that, young people like yourselves, other podcasters have been covering this. And that is because of the definite change that has happened in our mainstream consciousness, in their mainstream consciousness, because of the kind of outreach that has been made to the Northeast. Now, that is the first part of your question, but the second part might take a little time if you allow me to, because the conflict
go
is
ahead.
quite thanks, because the conflict is really complex. This is we have to understand that this is not a conflict between two rebel groups. This is not a conflict between two countries. There is a very deep seated identity issue that comes with ethnicities, and these are tribal ethnicities. This is a ethnic competition, ethnic rivalry, ethnic conflict. This is not a religious conflict. This is not a political conflict. This is not a conflict because of some policy that's come out or something against the central government. But we have to understand it in the context of tribal communities are very, very close to their identity, their culture, their land. This is possibly one of the most unique factors in their community makeup. They are also, most tribal communities are also ancient communities in terms of they've lived in these lands for a very long time, so everybody is a stakeholder. They've also lived side by side, not necessarily in peace. They've lived side by side many a times in conflict. There's been inter-tribal rivalry, inter-tribal conflict, This is not the first time that this kind of a conflict has happened in Manipur. In the late 1990s, it had happened between the Kukis and the Paitis. The Paitis are a sub-tribe of the Kukis. Before that, it had happened between the Kukis and the Nagas. There's always been this sort of permutation, combinations of little conflicts that sometimes become bigger, sometimes are contained. There have been different levels of conflicts, but this has been historically prevalent. Now, you also use the word majority and minority, so I would like to look at it from that angle as well and bring in a little bit of history. So the Meiteis were the ruling class. They were the owners of, or people who ruled over the vast lands of Manipur, the empire, the Meitei Empire, Manipur Empire, has many a times extended right into Myanmar. Today, what is called Myanmar has also been brought back. The Burmese have invaded it right up till, Imphal. This is one of the reasons that there was British involvement in this region, because, they had to take the help of the British to fight the Myanmaris. So, it resulted in the Anglo-Myanmar War, Anglo-Burmese War, which eventually established the British in this region. Now, one of the problems with the British was that they were not welcomed in the Northeast. See, the Northeast was the final frontier, right? Like, you come in from the Northwestern frontier and you move in and, the Northeast seems really distant. It was only after the Battle of Plassey, when they got their hooks into Bengal, that they set their sights in the Northeast. Now, when they entered the Northeast, or when they started, they sent anthropologists and they sent their ICS officers, things like that, first to do a recce. They realized that they were not welcome, even though there were lots of small conflicts going on in terms of, conflicts of secession, in terms of the ruling families. There were conflicts within the ruling families of Assam, of, there was this, the Burmese that were invading Manipur. Apart from their role there, the local tribal populations who are known to be fiercely independent, and as you would know this very clearly, the both of you, as you know Kashmir well, the tribal populations have also a certain amount of fierceness to them, independence to them. They were not happy with these people coming in who have nothing to do with them and trespassing their lands, even if it was for trade. So their trade routes would often be attacked by tribal communities. And one of the histories goes like this, where they say that the cookies were brought into Manipur because the Nagas were coming down the hills and disturbing the British trade routes. So they brought the cookies in almost as buffer. They could have brought the cookies in also as buffer from the Myanmarese attack. And of course, there are different stories. Now, if you were to ask the cookie community, they'd say, no, we've been around for a long time because these boundaries are new. And we've always, moved in and moved out. Meitei historians would disagree. But, we're not here to decide what history is right. But we're here to sort of deliberate on why this sort of a conflict should take place in this day and age and what is the reasons for it. So this has been just the context in which the Meiteis and the cookies have lived. Now, in terms of minority and majority, you see the Meiteis might be about 51%. This is from, let's say, the 2011 census. There hasn't been a census after that, but there have been projections, wherein they start doing their research and they have certain projections. A lot of people say Meiteis are majority Hindus. That necessarily might not be true any longer. Once the next census is done, we might find different numbers because there is a substantial amount of Christian population amongst the Meiteis. And there is also a substantial amount of population that is considered Sanamahis. Sanamahis is, the indigenous faith. And therefore, the Vaishnavas, Hindus, might not be like, we like to say that, 51% Meitei is the majority Hindu. No, they might actually be far, far less than what we think. The Christians, the cookies are obviously majority Christians, and there's a small little community within the cookie community that is Jewish, which traces its ancestry back to the lost tribe of Israel, So, that's why it's so complex. And let me also tell you that Manipur actually is, in my opinion, I've studied all the states, I've lived in that region, I've traveled to all the remote areas, and I've studied insurgencies. So Manipur is possibly more complex than any of the other states because not only does it have the Meitei community, it has the cookies and it has the Nagas. So when we say tribals, that this is a fight between Meiteis and the tribals, it's not quite right because tribals are Nagas and cookies, wherein the fight is only between the cookies and the Meiteis. The Nagas have not stepped into this fight, But let me also say this, that when the British made Manipur a protectorate, it was the Manipuri king who sort of signed the agreement. And at that time, the British, in subsequent, like all the censuses after that, considered the Meiteis as tribes. They were either called hill tribes, they were either called forest tribes, they were called the original Manipuri tribes or the majority tribe, This kind of nomenclature was used. And that's what the Meiteis believe they are. Irrespective of the religious denominations, this is what they believe that they are tribals. The cookies also obviously feel that they are tribals. But when Manipur decided to join, the Treaty of Accession to India, the Indian Union, they decided that they didn't want the reservation, of scheduled tribes. Now, the reason they didn't want it because they didn't know what it would provide them, and because they were always in Imphal Valley, because that's where the king was, and that's where their religious, whatever was, they decided that, they were well to do enough. And, they, almost like they felt that the scheduled tribe sounded like they were being marginalized. Of course, the cookies, the Nagas were given the scheduled tribe status because this is again British policy. The British divided these lands in terms of hills and valleys. And the hills were more often than not excluded from development initiatives because they were just too difficult to navigate. And these hills were divided in such a way because they didn't want engagement with these tribal communities because they were actually disrupting their trade routes, killing them, and didn't have a great relationship. So they drew these boundaries, which today, are called the ILRs, the Inner Line Regulation, or the Inner Line Permits. You need a permit to go into a lot of these states. They were drawn by the British to keep the tribes away, and then, so on and so forth. History unfolded, and here we are today, wherein the cookies, who might be about, they say they're about 16%, but again, we don't know what the real census data is. But if you were to put the tribal communities together, they would be way above 30%, including the Nagas and all. So the minority majority here doesn't really, in my opinion, make sense, because you're talking about like a 10, 15, 20% difference in population. That also we're not sure about right now. So, maybe if there is a minority, that minority would be that tiny Jewish population, but that minority would not be the cookies, that minority would not be the Nagas, that minority would not be the Meiteis. I think they're equal stakeholder. However, the problem now is, because tribal lands, the hills, were excluded, cookies have ownership of the tribal land, which is all of the hill areas. That is 90% of the land of Manipur. Meiteis have the valley, which is Imphal, which they say is 10%. But if you were to use just plain logic, if you were to take out Loktak Lake, if you were to take out infrastructure, this would be possibly less than 6%. Now, the majority of Manipur population lives in the valley. Now, the cookies or the Nagas can live in the valley, which is Imphal. The Meiteis have to live in the valley, but the Meiteis cannot live anywhere else. They cannot buy any land anywhere else. Of course, in very rare cases, they can appeal to the hill councils, and the hill councils can decide. But, the hill councils are, again, tribal councils. They're never going to be very, how do I put it, very forthcoming in giving land to the Meiteis, but, that can happen. However, because the valley is Imphal, it is more developed for whatever reasons, it is more, let's say, central to Manipur. The majority of the population of Manipur lives there. And now the Meiteis' argument is that we are starting to feel threatened, because we feel what's going to happen in the next 20 years. This Imphal Valley is not going to be able to take this population. We are already in cramped situations, and it's going to be a mess. Number two, we feel that there's illegal immigration coming from Myanmar, which we have seen in all of the northeastern states. This is not specific to Manipur. We've seen Mizoram register 40,000 Myanmarese refugees. Right. So now they feel that there are these infiltrators coming in who are settling on reserved land. The Meiteis don't have access to this reserved tribal land, but these guys are settling on this land, and they feel like there's a trust deficit. They feel that the reason they are being allowed to settle on this land, because tribes, the Kuki Zo tribe, as we call it, the Chin Kuki tribes, it's almost contiguous. So you have them across the border also. You have them in Myanmar also. This is the same. This is the same umbrella tribe communities that you have in Mizoram as well. So see, the British weren't great cartographers. They couldn't pull boundaries, and you'll agree with me, knowing what they did on the northwestern frontier. They did the same line. Yeah, they did the same thing in the northeastern frontier also. So suddenly there were like these tribes, and there was like a boundary. One of the worst examples, the best examples I can give is in Africa. If you ever look at the map of Africa, have you seen how the lines are drawn? They're just like this. Like somebody took a map, took a pencil, and it's exactly straight. And again, that caused a huge amount of problems, because these are tribal lands. You're cutting through these lands. So anyhow, these boundaries were built. So half these cousin communities are on the other side. Half the cousin communities are here. And the Meiteis feel that they're being allowed to come in because they feel that there's some sort of relationship. They're more, they're softer on these infiltrators coming in, and the Meiteis don't want these infiltrators to come in. And I also feel that it's a national security issue, which we can talk about later. So looking at the infiltration, looking at the overburdening of the Imphal Valley, plus looking at the benefits you get by being a scheduled tribe, you get 31% reservation in administration, in education. You get, you don't have to pay income tax. So there's like this income tax waiver, if you're a scheduled tribe. You have access to all of this land. Now looking at this, the Meiteis are feeling we also want this, because who are you to decide that we don't have people who are deserving of benefits like this, right? And therefore, about 10 years ago, they put a petition in asking the High Court to intervene and recommend them as scheduled tribes. The High Court took its judgment out. Maybe not 10 years, it was about 10 years. I think 2013 they put this in. The High Court gave a recommendation to the state. And obviously, the rest is history. We know that a whole rally was taken out and that broke into violence and that conflict exploded. But let me remind you here, before we come to your next question, is the High Court can't decide independently who can become a scheduled tribe or not. The state cannot decide that either. All right, so the High Court only gave a suggestion to the state. The state can only give a recommendation. After that, it goes through multiple processes. So it'll go to the NCST, it'll go to the Tribal Research Institute. NCST is the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. TRI, Tribal Research Institute. It will go, it will be vetted by other scholars. Then it'll go to the cabinet, and then, the president will have a look, so on and so forth. It's like, it can have many, many different routes. An example being that the Banjaras down south were given scheduled tribe status. For 20 years, it has been in court, because there's been an objection to it. So it's not that easy, and it also needs to be, vetted by multiple bodies. So my concern here is just by a recommendation, such a conflict was ignited, wherein a lot of the miscreants who were involved in this would have known that a High Court giving a recommendation or the state giving a recommendation doesn't automatically make you a part of the scheduled tribe list.
Yeah. So actually, जो मैं question पूछने वाली थी, I think most of them you have already addressed. But again, मैं इसको reframe करूँगी. You have explained very well about the complexity of Manipur entire. कि किस तरह से अलग-अलग tribes हैं. Specifically जो आपने उनके बारे में बताया, जो pre-Hindu tribes जो हैं, because a lot of people include them into Hinduism as well, but those tribes themselves not see themselves as a part of Hinduism. So these are complexity जो बाहर से देखने पे हमें मालूम नहीं पड़ती है. Also Meitei group के अंदर जो है Muslim community भी आती है, that is also there, 8% के around. तो मेरा जो सवाल है वो बहुत, मैं चाहती हूँ सिंपलिस्टिक वे में बताएं कि जो 3 ट्राइब्स की बात करते हैं यहाँ पे, कुकी, नागा, मैती, इन तीनों के क्या पर्सपेक्टिव है? लाइक मैतेई का हमें समझ में आ गया कि वो किस तरह से थ्रेटन फील कर रहे हैं, बट नागा ट्राइब्स और कुकी वो चाहते क्या हैं इस वक्त? और अगर आप हमें सिंपल लैंग्वेज में 2-4 जो इंसिडेंट है बता सकते हैं, कहाँ से स्टार्ट हुआ और कहाँ पे जाकर के ये बिल्कुल एक तरह से विस्फोटक वायलेंस में चेंज हो गया? तो ये टाइम लाइन अगर आप बताएं तो काफी अच्छा रहेगा हमारे दर्शकों के लिए.
Amna, I would love to, explain all of this really simply, मगर इसमें कुछ simple है ही नहीं, क्योंकि इसमें historical moorings भी हैं, इसमें present day moorings भी हैं, इसमें role of external actors भी हैं, हर जो Northeast है, it's not like I've studied it for 15 years, I still can't call myself an expert, because of the amount of verticals you need to study for it, and the psychology that you need to understand, the ethnic rivalries that you need to understand, the historical perspectives. अब जैसे हम you mentioned that कई Hindus हैं मगर अपने आप को हिंदू नहीं मानते हैं, so on and so forth. Let me explain this. Start from here. We can look at tribal populations from multiple ways. पहली चीज है कि in the Indian civilizational understanding, tribe जैसी कोई चीज ही नहीं, tribe जैसा कोई word ही नहीं होता था. If you read the most ancient scriptures, वो उन्हें ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा उनके नाम से बुलाते थे, in terms of कीरट हैं या निषाद हैं, If you read our ancient scriptures, this is how they were named. They were not called by a different way of life, right? Tribe is a very, very, it's a very, very Christian term. It comes from the relevance of we are an organized religion and the rest are pagans. They are tribal, they are a community, and you'll be surprised to know that it was only in the much later censuses, that late 19th century census, जिसमें tribe word use हुआ था और animism, tribe का section आया था और animism का section आया था. We never segregated religions or faith or religious practices on the basis of animism or whatever. It was faith. तो अगर, and as I'm sure you'd agree with me that India is an ancient civilization. यहाँ कोई population ऐसा नहीं है कि कोई पहले आया था कोई बाद में आया था. ये जो entire idea of indigenous है, native है, ये सब, why do we have it in the English language? Because this was nomenclature that was brought by the British, and because they were studying us as natives. They were they were the foreigners, so they were studying us as natives. So the nomenclature became indigenous religion. हमारे लिए indigenous कैसे हो सकता है? We've lived side by side forever, and the tribal communities, what we call the tribal communities today, had enough interaction with other communities. They had their roles to play, whether it was roles as warriors, whether it was roles as traders. There is enough example of this sort of interaction. So when you look at it from an anthropological point of view also, you realize that there are a lot of similarities in the culture of any one of us and anybody who lives or is termed as a tribe. So for example, I've been to many tribes jahan Pitra Paksh Puja hoti hai. They worship their ancestors. I've seen many tribes that have the Ramayana, but from their own point of view, right? I have seen many tribes that do, जैसे हम घर in traditional societies, before we enter the house, we say a prayer or या तो हम पानी छिड़कते हैं or something like that. They still do that. So there's always been, how can, if you and me are neighbors for like 1,000 years, how can we not give and take from each other, right? And that was exactly the status. So if you look at the Vaishnavism in Manipur, it came in without conflict, all right? There wasn't any persuasion. So if you even see the Vaishnavism today in Manipur, it is the most beautiful hybrid higher culture of Sanamahism and Vaishnavism. So it's not like they chose one over the other, they made a hybrid, and they still have what we would now consider indigenous gods in their house. And, they would still have Govindji, so this is their take. But of course, when the British came, that's when the missionaries came. There was no contact of the missionaries before that. And one of the reasons, mind you, that they brought in the missionaries was to tame the tribals. So they said, because again, their point of reference was them, right? And this was the other. So they were like, yeah, these guys are completely like wild. They are pagans. And this is, I'm talking about, I've seen this, I've read like original documentation, references, government records, as well as anthropologists who were sent in before the government actually sent their political agent. The words that has been used to describe these communities has been pagans, savage, barbarians. So they actually said that only if we give them the Bible will we be able to civilize them and tame them, and that is the reason that missionaries actually first came in, because this was like, we get some brownie points and this is our moral duty. Very often in all of my talks, I quote this, so people who are watching this, who've watched me before, would know about this reference. The political commissioner, one of the first political commissioners, wrote a letter to the secretary of the government Great Britain, saying that these tribes are completely wild and they are at a very nascent stage of nationhood. We have to accept that the British were extremely observant, right? And he said we're making a huge mistake by trying to convert the well-to-do, the middle classes, the upper middle class in India. What we need to do is we need to convert the tribals. And for that, could you give us some money? Otherwise, I'm willing to spend money from my own pocket also. So the secretary replied back saying that, look, we can't commission this because, there'll be an uproar. Because in those days also, there were a lot of people, but there wasn't public support for colonialism. There was, certain segments of society who objected to colonialism, who said that, no, you can't go and interfere in other people's like religious and moral affairs. So they said, no, we can't publicly do this. What should we do? So then they said, what we're going to do is we'll send you money for education and you hire missionaries to deliver that education. So this was one of the ways that the missionaries came in. And then, of course, the whole missionary aspect and how that created a separate identity is for another talk altogether. But as we have seen amongst the Nagas as well, the longest running separatist movement started from Nagaland in the country, right? So your question, now coming to your question of what the Nagas feel and what the Cookies feel, the Nagas were in, again, like tribals not bound by a geographical location, but Nagaland, of course, there were Nagas, but there's also a crew in Manipur that has a dominant Naga population. So all these areas right up to Arunachal Pradesh was a part of an imagined state that they wanted, which was called Nagaland. All right. Today, after 2015, in 2014, this dispensation came in. The first major agreement, peace agreement that was signed was with NSC and IM, which operated out of Manipur. And therefore, and many other initiatives have been taken. They're in agreement with NSC and K, which operates out of Nagaland and then Myanmar as well. Major initiatives have been taken wherein you see near complete peace amongst the Nagas. So the Nagas have not objected to any scheduled tribe inclusion in this conflict. The Nagas are not a part of this conflict. The conflict is only between the Cookies and the Meiteis. Now, when we come to the Cookies, as you asked, what is their perspective? One of the grievances that the Cookies have is that all the development goes to Imphal. It doesn't come to the hill areas. Now, they also feel that the Meiteis are politically dominant because that's how, it's based on population. So therefore, the Meiteis are politically dominant. There is also ancient rivalry where they feel that the Meiteis felt that they were better off or of higher status than the Cookies, right? So there are all these insecurities. Now, of the question of development, yes, the hills have very little development, but let me also then give the counter argument that you have hill councils. Hill councils have a lot of power vested in them. So the tribal areas have hill councils, which is made out of, tribal members who are members of parliament as well, and tribal leaders. And they have the responsibility of, they can pass rules and regulations and make laws pertaining to education, pertaining to family matters, pertaining to a certain amount of administration, so on and so forth. A lot of criticism also says, or a counter view also says, that one of the problems is the hill councils are not functioning at their best. Now, the reason being, the Cookies, very much like the Naga, is an umbrella word. So there was no such word as the Nagas. If you go to some of the older generations in Nagaland, they'll tell you that they never self-referred to them as the Nagas, because within the Nagas you have 16 other sub-tribes. These sub-tribes have different languages. they had different, let's say, could be different cultures, in a certain way, or different practices. Same with the cookies. Cookie is an umbrella term. There are multiple sub-tribes, and not necessarily do those sub-tribes get along with each other. So, for example, in the late 90s, there was big conflict between the cookies and the Meiteis. The Meitei is a cookie sub-tribe only. So sometimes the criticism has been that hill councils don't function properly to really build on the developing initiatives is because there is disagreement within the council members only. So that is, and of course, one is free to disagree with that. That may not be the only reason. But the other reason also is that if the lands are not conducive for outsiders coming in, see, development and industrialization, as you would agree, will also require migrant workers to come in, right? Will also require settlement to happen. Now, if that environment is not conducive to this, then it becomes an impediment to the development initiatives. And sadly so, Amna, because Manipur, from the route of More, which is on the border, was supposed to be our gateway to Southeast Asia. And if it became the gateway to Southeast Asia in balance with our Act East policy, do you know the kind of traffic, the kind of industry, the kind of tourism that would come via Manipur, increasing their development, increasing the opportunities that Manipur could very well have? Unfortunately, that is not the case.
Khalid, do you want to ask a question or should I go ahead?
I just wanted to ask a question on this. Want to understand, Rami, playing the devil's advocate, I'm quoting from New York Times, again, from the Western gaze, right? So what I understood from you, it's, in fact, I think the most diverse conflict on the face of it in India. And in a way, very cute, very cute names, Meiteis, cookies, but the kind of violence is, I mean, it's shocking, right? 100 people dying and civilians, of course, mostly on both sides. And they doing this to each other. I mean, such brutality where kids haven't been spared, women haven't been spared. There are, there's news of rape also, being used. Now, you spoke about how the fact that, of course, the numbers that I also researched was 53% is what Meiteis is, and 40% roughly is what cookies is, including, the Naga, the tribals, the Nagas also, right? So there's no majority minority. But like I said, if we look at someone from the Western gaze in New York Times, you are saying that, on the surface level, it would be a misreading of the situation to see it anything at all to do through religion. But can we say that there are undercurrents of it? Because what it says is, it quotes one of the Christian hill tribe leaders, some of them, who say, and I quote them ad verbatim, "Separation is the only answer. Leaders of the mainly Christian hill tribes are saying that living alongside the Hindu Meitei people is as good as death for our people." So can we say, amongst all this plethora of complexities, permutation, combination, there is an underlying thing of where, and you would know this, of course, as an authority, that this is a Christian majority cookies versus Hindu majority Meiteis?
So, Khalid, your question is a very, very relevant question, and it is a very, very sensitive question. So when I answer this with full responsibility and measure. The reason I do this is because more often than not, as we've noticed recently, and especially because of some amount of competition, animosity that the West has with the present dispensation, there has been this free flow of any conflict that happens to give it a communal lens, right? And this somehow plays to their narrative of, some sort of rise in some mad Hindu nationalism, It also very often surprises me the level of research these big brand media houses do. I noticed this in the CA also, whereas, again, you would agree that, it was completely communalized without any reason. And there was a lot of deficit of really ground research that was done. And it was the same actors, the same players. Now, obviously, for them, it's very easy to say, oh, it's a communal thing because one is Kuki, one is Meitei, and one is majority Hindu and one is majority Christian. But that really would not be accurate, because then why is it that the Meiteis and Kukis have never fought before? This is the first time they've gone into conflict. And when has it happened? It has happened in context to a scheduled tribe listing inclusion recommendation. Now, why would that be the trigger? A trigger could be anything then, right? A trigger could be the amount of missionaries there are in Manipur, or the rate of conversion. It could have been anything, I'm saying, but it wasn't. It was this. It was the fact that the Kukis don't want the Meiteis to have scheduled tribe status. Now, if it was a Christian or a Hindu thing, I believe that, they've been Christians for 100 years. At least one fight would have happened. Basis that it hasn't happened. Number two, every community will have a fringe element. Every community will have its own radicals. Whether it's the Meiteis will also have them. And Meiteis have agreed with me that yes, we also have fringe radicals who we don't agree with. The Kukis have also agreed with me. Some of the rational Kukis, you meet just as, you meet rational Meiteis. Both of them will say, yeah, we don't agree to, this kind of branding or of this being a communal conflict, or reaching out to international organizations to come and say, oh, come save us, because we are a minority in this country. We are being attacked. They've said this. But, however, there has been a long-standing demand of something that is, again, an imagined state, which is called the land of freedom, in English, translated, from their language to English, which the Kukis have wanted as their separate state. Mind you, unlike NSCN, unlike the imagined state of Nagaland, Nagaland was meant to be a separate country at one point of time. That is not the case with the Kukis. The Kuki land is a demand for a separate state. All right. Obviously, there are people with vested interests that want to make this a reality. And to me, their motives are clear, that they will not stop at a state, because they have a foreign hand that is supporting them. They will want more after that, and there's always this element of, who wants the majority of the power. And these are those miscreants that are running this narrative. Now, the counter argument to that will be, oh, the Kukis want a Kuki land because they feel that they are threatened. However, there are multiple reasons wherein this might not be possible. One is the straight up statement by the Home Minister when he visited Manipur, saying that there will be no territorial compromise or ambiguity. This is not on the cards of the government of India. Number two, just the way NSCN or any of these insurgent groups, after being the longest running separatist groups in the region, today have joined the mainstream. Today, Nagaland, is thriving, is because people have realized that a national identity, a unified national identity, is so very important, especially when India is on the rise. Is so very important because we have ancient historical connectivities that we had forgotten because of the kind of disconnect that had been brought in for decades. You see, once the British came in and they divided all these areas into excluded areas, scheduled areas, a psychological divide started forming. And unfortunately, because after independence, the subsequent governments couldn't be bothered to look at the Northeast. They thought that keeping the Northeast safe meant leaving it to its own devices. Let's not give it development. Who will want to take it over? Let's not, but they didn't realize the prolonged emotional impact that it had on the people of the Northeast, not being on, not having the same access to what you and me had growing up. They didn't have that, 15 years ago, when I used to go to the Northeast, when I used to travel to Manipur, there'd be all sorts of warnings that would come my way. Ki 4 baje curfew lag jata hai, वापस आ जाओ. You would not see youth, because youth was in Bangalore, youth was in Delhi, you would not see any industry. This created a psychological divide. The other thing that created a psychological divide was how it was again marked out by the British, that chicken's neck, that 22-kilometer, horrendously imagined region, landmass that connects India to the rest of the Northeast. It was so badly imagined that that created a geographical distance in our head. So because of this identity, this, cemented identity that each one wanted to play became so well defined. And looking at this, there was the Mizo movement for separatism also. There was now, they're trying to revive Cookie Land also. The thing is that apart from the government of India not agreeing to it, the cookies have to realize that, their existence will be in danger. If this sort of demand is at this point brought up, because A, it's completely anti-nationalist, B, you've seen how all the other states that had conflict have joined the development narrative and journey that the rest of India is on. Instead of fighting for something, that is what you should be a part of. And number 3, the Meiteis will not allow it, because Meiteis feel that this land belongs to them, and this will cause huge conflict between the Meiteis and the Cookies. So, I think the certain section of the Cookie community, needs to be disbanded. The rest of the majority Cookie population, which doesn't want this, needs to speak up and say, no, we have relevant grievances. Our relevant grievances are that we want more development, we want more access to funds, we want all of that. But no, we don't agree with this sort of separatist line of thought. And this is what the Cookies need to come up and say. And I think, that would segregate the logical, rational Cookie community from these miscreants who are trying to win favor from the West. And they don't understand, the West is not going to be able to help you. This is India's internal matter. They have no sort of jurisdiction on us, so this is just to get publicity.
Yeah. I want to add a few things when I was reading everything about Manipur. So I also came across that like different when we talk about tribe, so it's not that now they are looking for succession. I mean, they don't want to get separated from India, but basically within the reason they want their a place for themselves, basically. So Naga leader, they are already talking to the center to have their separate Nagaland, not out of the India, but out of the state, basically. A state for themselves. The same thing is happening with the Cookie, because Cookie का जो leader भी थे, जिसमें कि 8 बीजेपी के भी leader हैं, उन्होंने भी लेटर लिख के दिया है कि we don't even want state, हमको semi state भी चलेगा. Can you hear me, Rashmi? Yeah, हमको मतलब semi state भी चलेगा, I mean union state भी, but somehow if we would have our on land or अपना खुद का region, that would be better for us. So I mean, from that perspective, is it that possible to do? First thing, फिजिबल है या नहीं है, क्योंकि इंडिया में देखा भी गया है कि साउथ की अगर हम बात करें तो लैंग्वेज डिवाइड के ऊपर स्टेट के 2 पार्ट हुए हैं, नॉट इन सक्सेशन वे, विद इन द स्टेट के अंदर ही 3 अलग अलग रीजन कर देना. एंड अगर इसको बहुत ही आई मीन इट वुड बी वेरी सिंपलिस्टिक वे अगर देखा जाए तो ये एक तरह का रिसोर्स की फाइट भी लग रही है कहीं ना कहीं कुकी और मैती के बीच में, क्योंकि कुकी का कहना है कि एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में हमें उतनी जगह नहीं मिल पाती जितनी हमें मिलनी चाहिए. सो अगर हमारा अगर डिफरेंट स्टेट हुआ तो वी विल हैव अ मोर से इनटू इट. सो इसके ऊपर थोड़ा रोशनी. एंड ऑल्सो आई वांट टू टॉक अबाउट हियर अबाउट गवर्नमेंट. स्टेट में भी बीजेपी की गवर्नमेंट है, सेंटर में भी बीजेपी की गवर्नमेंट है। गवर्नमेंट कहाँ इस कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी को नहीं समझ पा रही है और क्यों नहीं टैकल कर पा रही है। उन्होंने फोर्सेस भेज दिए, लेकिन फोर्सेस क्या करेगी? क्योंकि ये इंसर्जेंसी नहीं है। ऐसा नहीं कि कोई भी ग्रुप निकल के बोल रहा है कि हमें इंडिया से बाहर जाना है। वो आपस की इंटरनल फाइट है। जो फोर्सेस हैं, वो उसको कंट्रोल तो कर सकते हैं, बट सॉल्व नहीं कर सकते। ये है तो इन द एंड सिविल मैटर ही, जिसको सॉल्व स्टेट को ही करना पड़ेगा। इनफैक्ट दिस इज ऑल्सो वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कि आर्टिकल 355 अप्लाई किया है स्टेट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने स्टेट में, विच सेज कि हाँ, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को भी एक टेंशन है कि स्टेट में किस तरह से चीजें हो रही है। कुछ पॉलिटिकल ड्रामा भी हमने देखा कि जो सीएम थे, उन्होंने पहले कोशिश की एक रिजिग्नेशन लिखने की, फिर बाद में लोगों ने गुस्सा दिखाया तो उन्होंने बोला अब नहीं कर रहा हूं मैं। तो व्हाट इज गोइंग ऑन? कहीं पे ऐसा लग रहा है कि जो हमारी लीडरशिप है, पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप, वो फेल हो रही है। कुछ डिस्टेंस है सेंटर और ग्राउंड के बीच में, जो वो समझ नहीं पा रहे हैं उसको हैंडल करने में। हाउ डू यू एक्सप्लेन इट?
So, Amna, this is a very wide question. Let me start from the beginning. Nagaland does not want another state, they already had Nagaland. Now, what they wanted was a separate country, which was called Nagalim, which included all of Nagaland, a portion of Manipur, the Ukhrul region, parts of Upper Assam, and Arunachal, Changlang, and Tirap area. This was their imagined state of Nagalim, and this fight was fought for a very long time, the separatist movement. In the 80s, the main insurgent group split into two. NSCN became NSCN-IM and NSCN-K. K was run by Kafla, who operated out of Myanmar, and IM from Ukhrul, because he's a Manipuri Naga. Today, the government of India is in agreement, is in negotiations with the K and KK splinter groups. And in IM, there's already a peace agreement that's been signed. It needs to be completed. So Nagaland, and even if you look at the election results, Nagaland has joined the national narrative today. That's why, if you look at how it's voted, for BJP, even though it's in an alliance, how it's voted for it, it shows that it has mainstreamed. So Nagaland is not a problem anymore. I think, as in any state, any community, the youth understands that conflict is not going to give them anything but pain. There were times when I used to go to Nagaland, I used to see military presence, which in itself was unnerving. You didn't know who was an insurgent, who wasn't. I would speak to youths there and they would say, we need to get out because there is no way we can start any business here, because everybody's businesses, become to be a part of an insurgent group and they collect tax from us. So we can't afford to run a business, And today, if you look at it, it's a world of difference. And that has happened because they've accepted peace, they've rejected insurgency, and all these leaders that ran these insurgencies have become much older now, and maybe they've also realized that, we've allowed our state to, go back in time instead of go forward in time. Maybe they've also realized that maybe they've become older and, they don't have the kind of cadre support that they did, So Nagaland is not a problem any longer. Kuki land has been an idea that they've had where, yes, you're right, they don't want a separate country, they want a separate state. But like I said before, on what basis? Because the history is contested. The Meitei say all of this area belonged to us. The Maharaja of Manipur was a Meitei. We ruled right beyond the borders of what today is the India-Myanmar border. So they will not, they will fight unto death if any territorial ambiguity happens or territorial change happens. Number two, the Kukis have also had substantial amount of insurgent groups. I'm not saying the other communities haven't. Other communities have had also, but Kukis have also had, and a lot of times, more often than not, even right now, if you see, when this conflict started, there were a lot of people who were saying, no, there's no infiltration. And I said, ho hi nahi sakta. This is a lie, because there's infiltration in all of the Northeast. We share a 1640-kilometer border with Myanmar, only with Myanmar. Huh? उसमें हर जगह में infiltration है. 40,000 refugees are registered who've come in from Myanmar are registered in Mizoram, right? We know that these borders are very porous, they're very thickly forested, they're very difficult to man. Fencing is going on, but fencing is only as strong as your weakest link in the fence. So it's a very difficult job for somebody, a paramilitary force like Assam Rifles to really man. But obviously they're making the effort that they are, but infiltration is a reality. And this was one of the problems, one of the bones of contention is that, this is what the Meitei thought, infiltrators are coming in, there's going to be a demographic change, they're settling on these lands, and therefore there was a demand for NRC. There was a demand for NRC where, there's been some discrepancy, there's not an agreement on the date, kya date hoega. And obviously we also need to look at the procedure of the NRC, and we need to look at it rationally, because no citizen should be impacted by the NRC. But therefore that is why this demand has come up side by side, this conflict, because of the illegal infiltration. Now the reason that a state cannot be given is because it is so strategically located. You have to have a substantial demand for it. Having autonomous district councils is like having a state within a state. And if you allow me, I'd like to correct you. The cookies have 31% reservation in administration. So if you notice, a lot of the top posts will come to the cookies, so there isn't this, the question is not of administration or education, because in that they have reservation. One of the grievances is political representation. That because our population's less, Imphal population's, more, it's more Meiteis that have political representation, this, that. But let me also tell you, the state is protected. All right. So the act that protects the state doesn't allow the assembly to take any decisions on the hill matters independently. Right? So they have a lot of vested powers. You have to have a real demand for a state. So if you have vested powers, if you have autonomous district councils, if you can, make your own rules, regulations that pertain to your tribe, you have certain amount of leeway to make family laws, to make educational laws, healthcare. What you need to do, in my opinion, is to use that to the maximum. To overcome disagreements within members within the hill councils, and figure out where you are not, exploiting these vested powers and where you should be. So unfortunately, the demand for a state will not and does not hold merit. And in my opinion, also, of course, the Kuki insurgent groups have gone into an agreement with the government of India, which is called the Suspension of Operations Agreement, where they've suspended their operations. But it also seems like, and this is again right at right now, whatever information is trickling in through that, I'm telling you, is that there seems to be a violation of those agreements. So a violation of SU operations would mean that you're not allowed to recruit new cadres. You're not allowed to use your weapons. Weapons have to be surrendered. Wherein there have been allegations, I say, I'm not saying this is for certain, there have been allegations that, surrendered weapons have been looted. And now they are in the hands of miscreants. Let me also tell you, there are about 14 Sioux camps that surround the Imphal Valley. All right. So one of the reasons that the Meiteis also feel threatened is because of the location of these camps. But that is a different matter. So to answer your question as to, why can't they be given a Kuki land? They want a state, not a country. is because of all these reasons, because of it being a national security issue, because the state is so complex, it's on the border, has its own problems like infiltration. We know about drug trafficking also, also because of the Meitei's point of view on it. This is this is what I can say to your first part of your question. Your second part of your question, which is about the government's role in this. Yes, this is a very complex situation. I don't think the state government expected it to go so much out of control. The state government has its own point of view where it says that because we were removing illegal settlements by infiltrators on forest land, this upset the rest of the tribals. Tribal communities say that, well, it should have been done post proper dialogue. Of course, my opinion can be very different, but this is what I'm telling you is the two sides of the story. Now, one of the reasons, one has to agree that maybe the assessment of the situation and the response in the limit that the response should have happened was delayed. But again, being devil's advocate, I'd also say that in situations like this, it's very, very, very tough to be heavy-handed. The minute you are heavy-handed, the minute you send in troops and say shoot at side orders or something like that, that's as an example, you will isolate one community or another. And as a nation, as a responsible nation, you don't want to isolate anybody. You don't want to aggravate a conflict situation. And aggravating a conflict situation on a border state has more implications than anywhere else. So we've noticed this historically also. We've noticed that there have been in the Northeast, one of the reasons for the kind of conflicts and insurgencies that they've had is the role of foreign hands. The role of foreign hands means when the Naga insurgency wanted to get militarized, when they wanted training, when they wanted funding, they traveled by road via Myanmar to China. And it was the Chinese that gave them training. When NSC and K, and Kaflang was their leader at that point, therefore the K, when he wanted refuge, he took refuge in Myanmar. Again, this is not the government's fault. This is not the Myanmarese government's fault, because they themselves have their own insurgency problems, their own ethnic violence. And like I said, there are cousin communities across the border who give refuge, right? So therefore, a lot of these wars were run from there. Drug trafficking, where do you think it's coming from? This sort of encouragement of poppy cultivation. Manipur, Mizoram have had a huge problem of young people using drugs. There was a time when Manipur had the highest rate of HIV because of the intravenous way that they would take heroin, and therefore again, the populations are very, very sensitive to infiltration because these are all the problems that come with infiltration. The country is very sensitive to infiltration, so it would be very difficult, for a government to take a very heavy-handed stance in this conflict. Of course, it is their responsibility to maintain peace, but it has to be done in measure wherein you don't isolate a community. Number two, I also think these are the kind of situations where civil society plays a very big role. Because tomorrow your children have to go to school together, your women have to work together, and you have to live side by side because this is your shared land, and Manipur, funnily enough, is known for its CSOs, the civil society organizations. They have dime a dozen civil society organizations, somebody from the Kuki side, somebody from the Meitei side, and multiple organizations who might not even get along with each other, even though they're from the same community. I have not seen one CSO come up that is made up of, good, credible people, both from the Kuki side and the Meitei side, and maybe as mediators from the Naga side. Why not? Have we come to this where we don't have any courageous, brave, ethical leaders from this side who want to call out for peace? Not one CSO like this. So, I often wonder, have we become lazy? Because we always say, government ko solve karna chahiye hamara sab problem. We never talk about our own responsibility in this. There's not one voice that has come up and said, this is too much, enough is enough. We will not give refuge, we will not give support, and we will not tolerate any person from our tribe or not from our tribe handling a stolen weapon or instigating violence. Why should we not expect this of our educated, rational Kuki and Meitei brothers and sisters? So I think civil society is also very important in this. And there is an example of this also across the Northeast where women decided, villagers and women who lived on the border decided enough is enough. We are going to be the informants. We are going to inform, the forces of any illegal movement, of any infiltrator that is coming in, and the homes that are giving them refuge. Remember that no infiltrator, no insurgent can operate if he does not have support of local people, right? So literally there have been examples where the backs of insurgent groups have been broken by civil society playing a role. So why can't we do that here as well?
Very interesting.
Rami, I feel like you're introducing us to a different universe altogether because, till now to understand why there would be a Hindu-Muslim clash, why there would be a Christian-Hindu, Muslim-Christian, all these permutation, common caste groups. But to feel people who look like each other or race issues, people who look like each other, they are from the same community and yet they are at each other's throats and, killing each other so brutally. And then you realize that beyond all these things there are people can just kill each other because they're from different tribes, right? So that I find very fascinating, even though it's so diverse, right? So many religions, so many tribes within tribes, and yet they have a reason to kill each other. So want to understand, you spoke about China, right? And during our research we found out that China was at the forefront and still is behind funding of all the terror insurgents groups in Northeast, to which credit to the current dispensation that they got into these historic peace accords. And in fact, just last year in 2021 there was this brutal attack on army convoy in which a colonel, his wife and a 5-year-old son were killed. And that is when Hindustan Times reported that this seems that China is back to its games and this terror attack was funded by them, coordinated by them. A lot of those terror insurgents from Northeast are also in China. How much would you put China's hand behind what has transpired in these last 2 months? Disproportionately just get into the zone, oh, ye to bahar walon ne karwaya, and don't introspect within. But how much do you see China was behind these instigations and helping the ones who are the troublemakers? Yeah.
So you're quite right. We've seen this historically happen. And it's not just about China. We've seen ISI operate in Bangladesh and train some of the insurgents that were from Tripura coming in, and we've seen the role of China. We've seen also local tribes and insurgent groups in Myanmar help insurgent groups in the Northeast, So none of this is new. So the possibility is very high. The reason I won't say, 90% they've done it or this or that, because we still, we usually analyze once things become a little clearer. And things become clearer when things start normalizing a little bit, We've seen that violence has tapered to a great extent. We haven't had major skirmishes of late, and I hope it continues to get better and better and better. But would I rule out the role of international hands? No, I wouldn't, Would I say that China is 100% involved? No, I wouldn't say. But involvement means what? Involvement means destabilizing, giving them access to weapons, or being able to influence ideologically, right? Now, the situation in Myanmar is such that China has a bit of an imprint in Myanmar today, because the military junta, as you know, is rather sort of has been friendly with China. Of course, of late, the news is also that the military junta wants to limit China's interference in Myanmar, which is good news. But I think India has played its cards very, very well, because we have a neighborhood first policy. We focused on our neighbors. We've kept a neutral stance with Myanmar. Of course, we have voiced our importance for democracy, but we haven't alienated the Myanmarese junta. Therefore, if you remember, very early on when this conflict sort of exploded, the Myanmarese government took out a notice which warned its citizens in India, saying that, please do not indulge in any illegal activity, please do not cause any communal violence, remember that, which people say, oh my God, the military junta is terrible for us, da 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 da. We can't interfere in choices of other countries. What we can do is see how it suits us and how we can keep a civil relationship. And I think because India has done that, not just with Myanmar, but even with Bangladesh, we've been going strength to strength with the present dispensation in Bangladesh. A lot of radical elements that could operate from these countries today are hesitant to operate. They don't have the access to operate. ISI cannot operate from Bangladesh any longer. Of course, I have my reservations of what if the dispensation in Bangladesh changes. Will the relationships remain this good, or would radicalization increase? We'll see what happens with that. But at this point, we've had these good relationships that have helped us. But again, the chances are that it is in a lot of these agencies' benefit to destabilize this region. This region is hugely important for us, maybe not just in terms of destabilizing this region and therefore destabilizing India, but also in terms of it is known to have critical mineral wealth, which is something that is very important to China. It again has very porous borders, which I'm repeating, which gives it access. These are, you can imagine 1,640 kilometers of borders of rough terrain and thick forestation is not that easy to, this thing. So for them, it's easy access. The drug trade, makes a lot of money. So, all these things, of course, can point towards the role of certain countries, but also the kind of weapons that these insurgents are carrying. Again, we will find this out. See, everything is not available to us. And one of the reasons in situations like this that everything is not available to us, in another conflict, a lot of other information might come out a lot more quicker. In conflicts like this, you see the information on details like this may not come out so fast because you never know when, it's such a highly sensitive situation. You never know when, who takes offense, which community takes offense to it. And nobody wants to point to, I've always said this, sometimes I've found cookie scholars saying, oh, people are calling us infiltrators. No. I have always said this, cookies who are citizens of India are citizens of India. They are as big a stakeholder as you or me are. So nobody is calling the cookies infiltrators. But infiltrators are also infiltrators. No? How do you know they aren't Chinese agents? How do you know that they, aren't trained operatives? But just because there is affinity in terms of they might be your cousin tribe, doesn't mean that you have a moral responsibility of protecting them. So I think for me it would be very important for this message to go to the cookies that cookies are citizens of this country. Nobody, and I've never heard any scholar, neutral player ever call cookies infiltrators. But infiltrators are infiltrators. And that is something that Manipur has to unitedly stand against because it cannot allow, like you said, other countries to interfere with our internal affairs, or other countries like China, or agencies like ISI, to fund or to give any sort of support to miscreants, to insurgents that don't, that are operating in this country against this country.
Amna, can I come in again?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Rami, I found this very fascinating that BJP now, and if you look at it from the perspective of the communist left-leaning media, would have never thought that a Hindu nationalist government would be voted back twice to power, second time even more comprehensively with 31 odd seats out of 60 in Manipur, and first time around 21, and they got into a coalition government, now also in a coalition government with the Nagaland People's Front. That shows that overall, whether it's the Kuki or whether it's the Meitei, has basically shown their support for this so-called Hindu Nationalist Party, which apparently stands for anti-minorities. But here is a state with a sizable Christian majority population. So that also should be a message enough, which complements your position that no, overall everyone is given them a chance twice. So how fascinating have you found that as a scholar, that BJP would have someday come back to back, and Congress getting decimated, and Mizoramis accepting BJP and saying, yes, you guys are great, we're going to vote you back to power?
So for me, it was never ever a question of if, it was only a question of when. The reason being, when I used to travel 2007, 2008, means I still travel every year, but in those years, Khalid, things used to be so bad. Like, I used to wonder why in Manipur I don't see a certain age group, because that entire age group was out of the state, because there was nothing for them to do after they finished school. It wasn't a safe environment. There were no hotels to stay in. There were no restaurants to eat in. There was, there used to be low intensity bomb blasts randomly, and nobody even got scared. Like, that's how desensitized you were. If you were traveling highways, you would always, the roads were terrible. And if you went to some of the remote areas, if you survived that journey to those areas, there would be no place to stay. So I, as somebody who was studying insurgency, separatist movements, I had to meet these people. I had to go to these areas. The only place I could stay in was homes of villagers who were lovely and generous and so welcoming, but there was always this threat perception that something might happen, or one must be careful, or one must carry their documentations with them. I'd never leave my laptop or my papers in the hotel room. This is the kind of life you live. There was no air connectivity. There was if you had to go to the northeast, you had to go to Guwahati and then go. So everything was centralized in Guwahati. States like Tripura, Nagaland, Manipur, to koi jata bhi nahi tha. Now if you go, it's on the map. Everybody wants to travel there. Hornbill Festival has become a great festival. If you look at the roads are fantastic. If you look at the security imperatives that have been taken, let me give you some statistics. If you ask me why they have joined this national narrative, and it's not just in Manipur, but even if you look at Tripura, you look at Nagaland, because this region was ignored for decades on end. And, we can't keep, I blame the British for a lot of their policies, but, we had the opportunity for 70 years to reverse these policies, and we never did. We absolutely ignored this region. Today, there has been a 74% reduction in insurgency incidents. There has been an 89% decline in civilian deaths in 2021 compared to 2014. There has been over 6,070 cadres of various insurgent groups in the northeastern states who have surrendered with over 1,404 arms and have joined the mainstream. And I think giving these statistics is important, because these are big numbers. And what does it tell you? It tells you about political will, that 70 years you couldn't do this. And it takes, half a decade for you to bring these changes in. According to the Ministry of Home Affairs, because of this significant security situation in the Northeast, and it's all interconnected, the APSA has been removed from 24 districts and 24, 25 districts in Assam, 15 police station areas in 6 districts of Manipur, and 15 police station areas in 7 districts of Nagaland in 2022 alone. And of course, I can go on, there's been a removal from majority of the places, Arunachal in the Namsai district, Changlang Tirap districts. So, once this sort of piece starts coming in, it becomes very, very interesting to see how people's psychology changes, how their mentality changes, how, the world starts looking at them. This wasn't just the level of reduction in insurgency, but the central government also made plans for the surrendering of these insurgents, and I think it's great because I study these things, so I understand what is, these insurgents who've lived in forests, who've lived as insurgents for so many years, need a different set of rehabilitation packages. The government of India revised the rehabilitation package that was offered to the surrenderies in the Northeast, with things like giving small loans. Now, these small loans, so it's, I think, 4 lakhs or something. Sorry, it's not loans, 4 lakhs fixed deposit, which you can't use for 5 years or some amount of time like that. But you can use that fixed deposit to take a small loan. Things like teaching them, how to do farming. These are the kind of holistic rehabilitation packages that were given. Therefore, more and more insurgents wanted to surrender arms, because who wants to live like that, away from their families, under the threat of agencies, the forces killing you. What did that do? That created a peaceful, we look at the Northeast, what we looked at the Northeast as a conflict-ridden state. Today, with the exception of what's happened in Manipur, we look at it as a peaceful state that we would want to visit. Therefore, tourism is thriving like never before. Over 1.18 crore domestic and about 1 lakh foreign tourists visited the northeastern states in India in 2022 alone, from 71 lakh in 2014. And this is also because of the regional air connectivity in the region that has promoted tourism. Again, connectivity plays a huge role. And when can connectivity come? When development comes. When can development come? When certain amount of peace prevails, So, airports in the northeastern region, at Rupsi, Tezu, Tezpur, Jorhat, all these areas, over 64 routes have been operationalized in these areas through the Udan scheme. These areas, you had to probably, travel by road. And again, like I said, the roads were terrible. The amount of airports that we had, I think, if I'm not wrong, there were only, till 2014, there were only about like 7, 8, 9 airports. Now, within 5, 6 years, there are 16 airports. So all these things add to what the youth aspires for these days. There's been like over 3 crore, 3 lakh crore spent on infrastructure development projects, which has improved road connectivity, air connectivity, railways, networks, waterways, telecom, power. So these are great initiatives where roads are better, air connectivity is better. Now, why could this not be done for 70 years? It's ridiculous that we isolated a whole region, and we keep talking about it as a region. It's actually 7, 8 states, which have unique characters and different sets of problems. My point is that it required political will to do this. And because of the political will and because of the on-ground difference that all of this has made, before this conflict happened, when I used to go back to Manipur, I saw small restaurants come up which were run by young kids. So, like how in Delhi you see, young, fashionable kids who've studied abroad, who've got their, new age aesthetics, they've come and set up little restaurants. In Ukrul, which was NSC and IM ka gad, there is chocolate being made in Ukrul. And if you look at the packaging, it's world-class packaging. So all you needed to do was give a conducive environment for this to happen. Indians are hugely resilient people. Indians are hugely entrepreneurial people. You just need to give them, an inch and, they'll make a building there, So that's all that was needed. And I think that is why the Northeast and many states have decided, have joined the mainstream consciousness, have joined the nationalistic narrative, and have voted for this government overwhelmingly. And for me, again, I'm a neutral observer. I'm not a Kuki, I'm not a Naga, I'm not a Meitei, I'm not an Assamese. I look at it, surely on the basis of, I believe I have a vantage point, seeing it before and seeing it today. And I see the difference.
Okay. I'm going to ask my last question. So, Rashmi Desai, I want your insight about
Rami.
this. Sorry,
Rami.
Rami Desai. Okay. So I want your insight about this Northeast region being gateway to Indo-Pacific free trade. इसके बारे में भी काफी बात होती है. So that make this entire जो region है इसको काफी significance बना देता है इंडिया के लिए. So do you think, I mean, whatever your insight is about that entire thing, वो आप please दीजिए. साथ में, do you think कि जो foreign powers हैं, वो बहुत interested होंगे conflict में, जो fault line है उसको exploit करने में, because of this area is so significant for free trade in Indo-Pacific, जिसमें China already as a aggressor role play करता है. So I want your insight in that.
Of course, the gateway to Southeast Asia, which would connect us not in just in terms of trade, but also in terms of soft power. Now you understand, Southeast Asia is predominantly Buddhist. Major pilgrimage points are in India. Right now, the route that they have to take via Calcutta, which is double in cost. If More was to open up, this would become a tourism gateway. And unfortunately, because of this ridiculous fear that was spread during the CA, Manipur mein ILP inner line permit kabhi hota nahi tha. They asked for the inner line permit, which I think is a very, very bad move, because you need a permit to get in, get out, things like that. Actually get in. But More was to be the route, and that entire pilgrimage would come from there, and the railroads that are being made and the flight connectivity would make it easier for them to go to Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, where the places of pilgrimage are. Apart from that, we have old historical connectivity, tourism would become easier. Wouldn't you like to take a road trip down to, from the Northeast into Myanmar? Of course we would, and, that would connect you to other Southeastern states as well. So this has been our dream. It was the Look East policy, which was changed into the Act East policy. Now with the growing influence of China, of course, this is under threat, and with conflicts like what has happened in Manipur, of course it takes a backseat, like it doesn't take a backseat, but it delays the process. I am very positive that, the conflict will be resolved, there will be leadership that will come up. And, I must say this on your show because I hope it reaches people, that people don't realize, abhi kya ho raha hai, that these communities have leaderships that only want to speak for their communities, because that also gives them some amount of leverage with their communities, some sort of power with their communities, some sort of like, sort of this radical raging unity it creates, right? What they don't realize, if leadership comes out right now that can speak logically, rationally, in a fair way from both the communities, that individual or that group of people will be remembered in history as the unifiers, instead of the destroyers. So I think, I hope people realize the benefit of, speaking for both the communities and speaking for the welfare of Manipur. But having said that, Myanmar has China has an impact on Myanmar. If we look at the islands, Coco Islands, right, which is 50 at a distance of 55 kilometers from Andaman and Nicobar, you will see the kind of impact China has on Coco Islands. It controls Coco Islands. It is supposed to be Myanmar's islands. Um, they have a observation center. They have some radar centers. They've built a landing strip there, and it's 55 kilometers. I mean, the Indian Navy and the Indian agencies are very, very smart. So they have enough going on to counter it as well. But of course, that poses a threat to us, because where does it come from? It will have to cross this route to come down, right? You will have certain impact for it to come down. We, of course, also have problems in terms of, we have the Kaladan multimodal project, which is sea, which has a sea route and a road route. So that has come to a bit of a standstill, because the road route that it has to take is from the Sitwe port into Mizoram, Nagaland. So there would be an alternate route to the northeast. See, right now, our only land route is that Chicken's Neck, which is, like I said, it's 22 kilometers in width. So it's not a really, like, we need an alternate route. Of course, it's well protected, and it's well protected, and we are very always we are observant about it. But we need an alternate route, and this Kaladan multimodal project was to be our alternative route. And it's like 100 kilometers by road that will go into Mizoram and then further go into other states, wherein we can use the land route to bring goods in. However, the route before it reaches Mizoram, the route that it takes, the road route, that has its own insurgents, and those are Myanmarese insurgents, to the extent that they had even kidnapped some of the engineers who were working on this. So it's a great possibility that those insurgents are backed by the Chinese, that they don't want this alternate route to be coming up. So yes, there are these debilitating factors. There is the role of China and other vested interests that can work out of territories in Myanmar that isn't controlled entirely by the Myanmarese government as well. They themselves have their problems. They have the will to solve insurgency, but it's a big country. It has huge amount of ethnicities, and they have their own ethnic violence. So it's not as easy as it seems. But of course, put 2+2, the same insurgents can be used to, debilitate your future plans.
Rami, slightly lighter question. Do Cookies and Meiteis marry into each other's communities?
Well, I hope they do, but I don't think they do a lot. There have, obviously, there've been, there are so many modern Cookies and modern Meiteis in terms of who would not allow ethnicity to come between a good love story. But, that depends family to family. But let me tell you, amongst the Nagas and the Meiteis as well, there are a lot of cultural references. So there are certain traditions that cannot be complete unless a Naga is involved in it. So again, we have to look at it like this. And I always find the deeper you go into history, the more connectivity you find. Because these are, ancient communities who've lived side by side. There are a lot of traditions that are similar. There is a lot of characteristics that are similar. There's a lot of interconnectivity as well. So we've sort of forgotten that over a period of time. It's almost like our identities have become, so cemented that we feel this threat perception that anything happens, we lose our identity. Wherein I think Indians are by far, being such an old civilization, by far the strongest identity keepers in the world. No matter where we go, we don't leave our food, we don't leave our culture, we don't, there's a funny thing that I believe, I didn't hear it myself, but I believe that the Prime Minister said about Gujaratis, that if you go to Gujarat, you'll find Chinese food, they're always looking for Mexican food, they're always looking for something. When they travel abroad, they take the Gujarati cook with them. And I think I can say this about a lot of our communities. Whenever we go abroad, we have our own shopping markets. Like in England, you have the Indian stores, right, where you're going to find everything Indian there. You have your traditional practices. You have communities that are. So I really don't think that old civilizations like ours ever need to worry about our identities being under threat.
So it's a very rare, like cookies getting married to a Meitei, and that's a very rare occurrence.
Yeah, I would say more and more now. Like but still, I wouldn't say it is common.
Okay. Also, I find the current chief minister, his journey very interesting. A former professional footballer, then a journalist, then started this newspaper which did really well. Then once a congressee who won his MLA seat on Congress, then shifted to BJP. And of course, all this, the main patriarch who's helped all this to happen is himself a former congressee, the star of Northeast, Mr. Himanta Biswa Sarma. Rami, what's the aura and image of Himanta? Is he one of the most defining factors of this peace in Northeast? This Manipur violence being very sad, we condemn it, we feel sad for both Meiteis and Cookies, is an aberration. What has Himanta done? Because it seems all these former congresses, whether that's Biren Singh and then stitching all this together, what is your on ground? What is Himanta to a Naga, to a Manipuri, to a Mizoram, to, of course, Assamese, he is Assam's chief minister. What is Himanta to them?
So I think what really resonates with people is none other than Prime Minister Modi and his development agenda. Because this is what this region was lacking. It was lacking development, but it was also lacking some amount of attention. A very interesting thing happened. I was on a TV debate, and I think it was a cookie lady who said something very nice. She said, there was a time when we came, traveled in the rest of the country, we would be called chinkies. Today, nobody calls us chinkies.
That was later, I think, made punishable under law.
That's what she was saying, that nobody did. Now, one of the reasons for that is, even for it becoming punishable by law, is the fact that somebody of the stature of the Prime Minister made it a point to constantly remind us that the Northeast is so important, people from the Northeast is so important, his visits, the gamchas he wore, even the national heroes that he mentioned in his speeches. Who knew about Rani Gedaru? Who knew about Lachit Borphukan? But today they've become common name. He celebrated them. This is visionary, because not only are you bridging a political divide, you're also bridging a psychological divide. You can agree, disagree with the Prime Minister. You may like him, you may not like him. But I, as somebody who has been on the ground and had to suffer, the kind of infrastructure we had there, or also the fact that I was always looked upon as the other. It's like, aapko kya samajh aayega? Aap to bahar se aaye ho. We looked upon them as the other. They looked upon us as the other, right? Today, I have cookies and Meiteis both saying that thank you for being a neutral voice, or thank you for commenting on us, or thank you for studying us. Earlier on, it used to be almost like, who are you to study us? The same in the rest of the country. It was like, arey, ye to chinkis hai. Like, there was no wider knowledge to say, no, there's a difference between the Nagas, there's a difference between the cookies, there's a difference between the Meiteis, there's a difference between the Assamese. You just stole their identity like this and just panned it and said that chinky ho, So because of the attention that was given to the Northeast by a man of that stature, it came into our mainstream consciousness. Then the development imperatives were taken, and then leadership was found. Leadership was found because you needed leaders. See, these were all either regional parties or Congress, right? Like many other states and many other in the country, many other states, because there was one point where there was no opposition to the Congress. You didn't have the reach, you didn't have the cadre, you didn't have the money. But yeah, leadership was found, leadership was raised, leadership was developed, leadership was made to follow this one vision, which was Northeast, and the Act East policy was going to be a central focus of India's foreign policy. Simple as that. Now, when it comes to Himanta Biswa Sharma, he was one of the main guys. He used to be, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the finance minister when I used to be there at that time, in the state. And he was known to be somebody who understood the state, who had a grip of it, who, in those days, insurgency was very high. This was a very volatile state, who could manage all of this. He was known to be a great manager. He obviously has done a good job. He has fulfilled the Prime Minister's vision. We saw during even COVID times that, Assam became the center point of, dispensing. It had the first laboratory, and then the testing laboratories, that intelligence was passed, that knowledge was passed, and laboratories were set up in other states. They did a great job. Nobody can take that away from them. Himanta Biswa Sharma, in another way, is unique, is as NEDA chief, which includes a lot of tribal communities, he is a Brahmin, so that makes, that makes a very big difference, because obviously there's also an acceptability. Why will people listen to you? But at the end of the day, Himanta Biswa Sharma is associated to Assam. Leadership in other states are equally important and have done equally well. Again, when I go to Tripura, there was a time, from Agartala to Tripura Sundari, which is a temple, they'd say, "Arey, din mein jana padega, din mein jaake वापस आ जाना पड़ेगा," because nightfall mein insurgents would stop your car. I have been there, actually, in the last 6 months, I've been there twice. And because we were busy and we were working, the only time we could leave was at 8 o'clock. This was unheard of, and we were coming back at like 9:30 or 10, at night. And the roads were like world-class roads. It could be anywhere in the world. The temple itself, which was a tiny temple, now is being expanded. It's also absolutely safe. And when you see the kind of hotels that are investing there, you know exactly why. So we have to give equal credit to the leadership in other states as well. We have to give credit to, obviously, our Chief Minister of Assam also. But generally, the way I look at it is a vision that has been implemented well, because there is accountability, and that, I think, plays a very big role.
Rami, another thing, I don't know if this might irk some of the feminists, and Amana, sorry if it irks you. Northeast is matriarchal societies, right? And that has fascinated me. One would have thought, like before, like now that the insurgency is at an all-time low, strange, right? Matriarchal societies having insurgent movements, violent insurgent movements.
So let me say this.
One thing, I don't think it's a matriarchal society. It's a matrilineal society. That's a difference.
Okay.
Matriarchal भी है, matrilineal भी है, but सब नहीं है.
Okay.
So this is not the same across. There are communities. There was a time where in Assam, Assam nearly topped some of the lists of violence against women. So this is, you can't pan it. So it depends on tribe to tribe, community to community. So in Khasis, the women are really tough, they can be called, matrilineal, matriarchal, but Manipur also, the women are really tough in terms of, they're taken very seriously. They've always been in the forefront. Manipur has a market called the Ima market, which is like the mother's market, which is the oldest market governed by women, run by women for their handicrafts anywhere in South Asia. So uh, why is it so? It's because there's such strong people. So the Mera Baibis also, the women mothers group in Manipur, you know, at times of insurgency, at times of conflict, they've been at the forefront. Of course, there's a section of the Mera Baibis that I may not agree with on their way of conducting their protests. I may not agree with them, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they are tough women. But, the thing is that insurgencies are not that simple. I don't think it's gender based or one gender can solve insurgency, not solve insurgency. Mothers always want the best for their children. They would not want them to join any sort of insurgent movements.
I
But
just want to,
insurgency is
because
what.
so I just want to interject, sorry for that, because usually when we see insurgent movements, it's driven by men, right? Patriarchal societies where men have the domination, and whether that's religion or whether that's any other reason that they pick up the gun and they dominate in the society the ideology. Hence, I found it very fascinating that in some of the matriarchal societies in Northeast, not all, like out of Seven Sisters, few, that even though women had a lot of say, what then could have stopped them from men, initially being part of those insurgencies? That is what I basically sort of understand.
No, it's a fair enough question. I mean, it's a relevant question. So therefore, I say, like mothers want the best for their children. I'm sure that they wouldn't choose for them to go. But I just think the youth is also very impressionable. So now if the kind of drug trafficking that is happening, you have massive drug use. It's not that difficult to pass on a weapon. Also again, with this sort of borders being porous, there's a lot of ideological brainwashing also. What can any family member do at that? There's not much you can do. And I'm sure they don't want it. And, there might have been a point in some of these states where some of the separatist movements had the support of the women as well, because, you feel that you're fighting for something greater that you aspire for, and that it is for the greater good of your community. But in time you realize that eventually, it is only peace that prevails, and it is only peace that will give you the kind of opportunities that you want for your children. So there have been times where women's groups have also played a role in supporting movements, but I believe that that has happened because they felt that this is for my community, or this is for my religion, my ethnic brothers and sisters. And in time they've realized, Nagaland had the same thing. In time they realized that this great long running separatist movement really isn't going to benefit anybody. It's going to keep the state behind, and we need to now get on board in figuring out the opportunities for our next generation. I believe, Khalid, that women and leaders of civil society are going to be the greatest stakeholders in peace processes. I think women have a way of being able to gently analyze and assess all the components and all the impacts of insurgencies, because I've seen women who've lost their husbands in insurgencies in the Northeast. And these women are more often than not thrown out of their family homes once their husband is dead, and um, have had to look after their children on their own. Now, a lot of them have fallen upon their knowledge of their handicrafts and things like that to make living, but a lot of them have been exploited. So I think women can assess holistically because they know what they have to go through and that their children are entirely dependent on them. I think they would make great stakeholders in the peacekeeping process, which is going to come. You see, the fault lines in Manipur have deepened to such an extent that to bridge these fault lines is going to take some time and it's going to take concerted effort. So if we have leaders of communities, if we have community influencers, see, in these tribal communities, tribal leaders, important people from their communities play a huge role. So if we have people like this alongside women, and I have said this is not a question of religion. This conflict is not because of religion, but that doesn't mean that interfaith dialogue will not help in the peace process. I think it would. We are inherently a spiritual society. So when it comes to peace, I think depending on the goodwill and the better practices of what faith teaches us, that kind of interfaith dialogue would make a very big difference. Because I don't think any well-meaning, honest church leader or any well-meaning, honest priest in a temple or a leader of the Sanamites is ever going to say that this is great for the state. They would pull out the best from whatever faith that they have and say, look, it tells us that we can't kill each other. So I think that's where interfaith dialogue will play a very big role. I think, like you mentioned, that women could play a huge role in peacekeeping because they know the impact that their children will have, their husbands will have, and their lives will have with insurgency. And I think the role of civil society as well as the government. You see, even the government has to realize, and I'm sure will realize, the importance of rehabilitation. Till the displaced people cannot go back to their homes, we cannot think that peace has prevailed. Right now we have the Assam Rifles that is sheltering over 30,000 people from both the communities. But these are not shelters that these people should continue living in. So I think all these processes should aim towards bringing these people back home, to building fences, to building bridges between each other, between communities, and using whatever tools that they have to somehow lessen the divide.
I think it's incumbent also on the civil society of larger India to say to both Meiteis and Kukis that we stand with you, we stand with your state, we stand with the country, you are equal for us. And this tragedy that has happened, there has to be truth and reconciliation, and let give peace another chance. And you've done so fabulously in the last 1 decade, and we feel your pain, all those young children who are dead there. So I think that is the need of the hour, and I hope someone from the state, at least, I mean, I said, you did say civil society shouldn't always depend on the state, but at least some mission needs to go out there and tell them we are there, we share your pain. So at least we can say that on an individual level. Lastly, what's the procedure if one wants to travel northeast with Rami Desai? What is the procedure to apply for that?
Gosh, there's a very long, there's a very long application process. Only those applicants who pass the multiple examinations are allowed. No, anytime. I travel very often to the Northeast. I will be making my trips to Manipur as well. But before that, let me compliment you by how you've ended this, because this is absolutely crucial. This is the time, like you guys are doing this podcast. 20 years ago, you may not have done this podcast, but today you're doing this podcast because you feel that this is so important for us to understand. That's the same way I feel that India must understand the situation, must not speak out of turn in terms of, if you don't understand the situation, don't talk about it, because things are sensitive. One thing you say like this, one thing you say like that, like this New York Times thing you quoted, or what's happening at the European Union. 5 people deliberating on Manipur when they've never been to Manipur. When they don't understand ethnic identities, rivalries, histories. They're talking about some random things. What does it do? It gives, it gives some sort of push to the miscreants who are wanting to do this. It gives them encouragement. So I think the rest of India, like you rightly said, needs to needs to make sure that everybody, whether it's Cookies, Meiteis, Naga, anybody who's impacted knows that Manipur is hugely important for us, that we feel every Manipuri is a part of us and we have grieved with them, and this is the time when we need to send resources, we need to send funds to organizations that are working on ground, make sure that those organizations are legit organizations, and ensure that we do our bit in being able to help them and not be scared of the conflict. In good times, start traveling to Manipur. It is our responsibility as much as it is theirs to make sure that we show the world a sense of normalcy. We show the Manipuris that we're not scared of coming. We believe that nothing will happen to us, because it is the kind of generous society that it is, welcoming, hospitable society. Start traveling there, start bringing normalcy back, talking about it. And I think it's also important now to start talking about the way forward. How do we fix this? How do we go forward? And what can we do? This is super important.
Thank you so much, Rami. It was a masterclass in understanding Manipur, understanding its various complexities. And to be honest, I mean, it was a different universe one got in touch with, because to see such a diverse conflict and understand that it's not just religious tensions, caste tensions, race tensions, it's sometimes also tribal tensions that, human beings can sadly kill each other over. But the most I feel sad is for those kids who are in shelter homes. They need to be right now, with their neighbors. They need to be at their homes. And India stands with them. We stand with them. And we hope, pray that, peace returns. And, this is an aberration, because definitely statistics, facts, and reality in the last 1 decade has put Northeast up there. And everyone from the top tier cities of India wants to go to Northeast, and hope that just happens. And they ultimately are a big part of us if we want to go from that 5th biggest economy to number 3, number 2. So thank you so much, Rami, for joining us. And
Thank you.
we assure the viewers that once Rami is back from Northeast, we'd again ask her for her time, and hope she obliges us and we can brief them, because the genuine grudge of Northeastern has been that it's been neglected. But again, credit to the current dispensation, they have brought it to the proper consciousness, and there's more and more connectivity taking place. So thank you so much, Rami. And guys, please do like, share, and subscribe, and keep giving us all the love and support you guys give. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.